The cafeteria at Ridgeview High buzzed with the usual noise of clattering trays, loud laughter, and students rushing from table to table like currents of a restless river. But for the new girl, Aria Hart, it felt like she was standing in the center of a storm without shelter, clutching her tray of simple food as if it were a shield against the dozens of unfamiliar eyes staring at her with curiosity, suspicion, or indifference. She had transferred mid-year, a terrible time to start at any school. Her father's job had uprooted them again, and she had already learned the painful truth that kids could smell new from miles away, but she didn't expect trouble on her very first week, especially not from Jason Cole, a boy known across campus as the bully who had never been challenged and who had been given far too much freedom to torment whoever crossed his path. Still, she tried to walk calmly, scanning the room for an empty seat, her heartbeat drumming a nervous rhythm against her ribs. Telling herself to stay composed, breathe slowly, and pretend the whispers weren't about her, but Jason noticed her immediately, like a shark sensing fresh vulnerability in the water, and he grinned, nudged his friends, and began walking toward her with a swagger that warned of trouble before he even spoke. And Aria's stomach tightened, her instincts screaming that she needed to get away fast, though she had nowhere to go, wedged between students and tables, balancing a tray that felt heavier than it should. She lowered her gaze, hoping he'd ignore her, but Jason thrived on attention and dominance, and he wasn't about to let a new girl slip by without reminding her exactly who controlled this place, so he stepped into her path and blocked her with a single move of his foot, forcing her to stop abruptly so the water in her cup sloshed out and her fork fell to the floor, and the laughter around them began to rise like a cruel soundtrack to the humiliation he was planning. "Look at you," Jason mocked, voice loud enough for half the cafeteria to hear. "Already making a mess and you haven't even survived your first lunch," and Aria clenched her jaw, refusing to let her voice shake as she replied quietly but firmly, "Please move," though she knew deep inside that he would do the opposite, because bullies never yielded when asked politely, they only escalated, and he took a step closer, invading her space, smirking as if her calmness annoyed him. "Say that again," he challenged. Leaning in, "I didn't hear you," but Aria kept her tone even, her eyes steady, refusing to give him the fear he wanted, and that only fueled his irritation further because Jason lived for reactions, fearful eyes, trembling lips, shrinking voices, and Aria wasn't giving him any of that, so he slapped the tray out of her hands with an explosive smack that sent food flying across the floor as gasps erupted from nearby tables, and before she could even react, before her mind could process the humiliation, he suddenly shoved her. Then, in a moment so shocking the entire room froze, Jason swung his hand and hit her, the sharp sound echoing off the walls like a gunshot that silenced the cafeteria in an instant. Aria stumbled backward, her hand flying to her cheek where the sting spread like heat, but she didn't fall. She stood her ground, eyes wide not with fear but disbelief. And the crowd held its breath because no one expected him to actually strike her, not the new girl, not someone who hadn't provoked him, not someone who had done absolutely nothing, and for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty flashed across Jason's expression, just for a second, but it was too late. Something changed in the air, something subtle at first, like the shift of a breeze before a lightning storm, and the cafeteria doors opened again as a tall figure stepped inside, Ethan Ward, a quiet junior who few people knew well but who everyone respected because he carried himself with a calm confidence that didn't need volume or violence to be noticed, someone who rarely involved himself in drama but who also had a reputation, whispered, never confirmed, of having a past far more intense than anyone at Ridgeview High truly understood. Ethan had been walking in just as Jason hit Aria, and he stopped instantly, his eyes narrowing, his jaw clenching in a way that made several students glance between him and Jason with nervous anticipation, because although Ethan wasn't known as a fighter, there was something in his silent stare, something sharp and cold, something that made Jason's bravado falter. Aria, still stunned, didn't see Ethan approach at first, but everyone else did, watching as he crossed the cafeteria with slow, intentional steps, his gaze locked on Jason, who suddenly found it difficult to breathe normally, not because Ethan was threatening him, but because Ethan wasn't showing a single ounce of fear, anger, or hesitation, and that quiet confidence was far more terrifying than shouting ever would have been. Without raising his voice, Ethan said, "You hit her," and Jason tried to scoff, to shrug it off, to regain his swagger, but his voice cracked slightly as he replied, "So? Stay out of it, hero," and Ethan stepped closer, now only inches away, calm but firm as he repeated, "You hit her," as if confirming a fact that had consequences Jason wasn't prepared for, and something about that simple repetition made Jason's throat tighten, his palms start to sweat, because Ethan wasn't reacting like others usually did, others who feared him, avoided him, or tried to appease him. Ethan was different, steady, unmoved, and Jason suddenly became acutely aware of how many eyes were watching, how the cafeteria had become silent, how the narrative had shifted without his permission. He opened his mouth to retort, but before he could speak, something unexpected happened. Jason's face drained of color, his breath grew short, and he grabbed his chest as if an invisible hand had squeezed his lungs, gasping for air and stumbling backward, his bravado collapsing instantly into panic. I can't breathe," he choked out, falling to his knees as the crowd erupted in murmurs of shock and confusion, some thinking it was an act, others genuinely alarmed, but Ethan stepped back, hands raised to show he hadn't touched Jason at all, and Aria, though shaken and hurt, stared wide-eyed as the boy who had hit her moments earlier was now begging, literally begging, for someone to help him. Jason clawed at the floor, gulping short, desperate breaths, eyes wide with terror, and the same students who encouraged his bullying minutes before now backed away, unwilling to get involved, but Ethan knelt down just close enough for Jason to hear him and said in a low voice that somehow cut through the chaos, this is what it feels like when you can't control what's happening to you, remember it." And though Ethan hadn't harmed him, hadn't laid a finger on him, his presence alone forced Jason to confront the fear he had inflicted on others for years. Teachers rushed in, students panicked, and Aria stood in the middle of the room, trembling not from pain but from the weight of what she had just witnessed, how quickly cruelty had turned into desperation, how the boy who ruled the cafeteria with intimidation was now the one gasping on the floor, pleading for help. And as the chaos unfolded around her, she felt something ignite inside her, a strength she didn't know she had, because for the first time since walking into this new school, she realized she wasn't alone, and maybe, just maybe, this year wouldn't break her after all. And as the chapter of her terrifying first week began to close, a new one quietly opened, one filled with unexpected allies, hidden truths, and a school that would never forget the day the bully who hit the new girl ended up begging for someone to save him. And if you're watching this story, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, because chapter 2 will reveal the shocking truth behind what happened to Jason. And trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. The ambulance sirens faded into the distance as Jason Cole was rushed out of the cafeteria, leaving behind a heavy silence that clung to every student like a shadow as teachers attempted to restore order. But the atmosphere felt different now, as though the walls themselves remembered what had happened, how the school's strongest bully had crumbled to his knees gasping for help after striking the new girl, Aria Hart, who still stood frozen near the spill of her fallen lunch, her cheek burning faintly from where Jason had hit her, her mind replaying the moment like a loop she couldn't stop. Yet what haunted her most was not the slap itself but the look in Jason's eyes when he couldn't breathe, pure, raw terror, the kind that strips away pride and leaves only the truth of who someone really is. And as the cafeteria began to empty, students whispering rumors with the speed of wildfire, Aria found herself unable to step away, feeling as though the entire scene had anchored her to the floor until Ethan Ward approached quietly, his presence somehow grounding even in the chaos, his eyes calm yet unreadable as he asked gently, "Are you okay?" And Aria nodded out of instinct, though she wasn't sure if it was true, because her entire body trembled with a mix of fear, adrenaline, and confusion, and something about Ethan's steady gaze made her exhale for the first time since the incident. He wasn't loud, he wasn't dramatic, he simply existed in a way that made everything else feel more manageable. And Aria finally whispered, "You didn't touch him, right?" And Ethan shook his head firmly, replying, "Not even close," which only deepened her confusion, because she knew what she saw. Jason had panicked out of nowhere, gasping as if his lungs had stopped working, and Ethan didn't appear surprised, which made Aria's stomach twist with curiosity and unease. They walked out of the cafeteria together, passing students who watched her with new eyes, not sympathy exactly, but something closer to stunned respect. And for the first time since arriving at Ridgeview High, Aria felt seen in a way she didn't expect, not as a victim but as someone who had survived something big. Still, her mind kept circling the strange part, Jason's sudden collapse, his frantic gasps, the way he clawed at the floor like he was drowning in air, and the unsettling calmness in Ethan's expression, as if he had witnessed something like this before. They reached the hallway when Principal Morton intercepted them, stern expression etched deep in his face as he demanded, "Ethan, Aria, my office now." And though his tone was sharp, Aria could sense he wasn't angry, he was rattled, shaken even, his eyes flicking back and forth as though he feared the school's reputation was slipping through his fingers. Once inside the office, the three of them sat in uncomfortable silence until Morton finally exhaled and asked, "What exactly happened?" And Aria recounted everything, from Jason confronting her, to him slapping the tray out of her hands, to the moment he struck her, and then, finally, his terrifying collapse, while Ethan listened with a quiet seriousness that made her feel safe, supported in a room where she expected blame or disbelief. After she finished, Morton turned to Ethan, asking, "And you?" And Ethan simply replied, "I walked in right as Jason hit her. I confronted him." Then he panicked, but Morton pressed further, narrowing his eyes, "Did you threaten him? Touch him? Intimidate him physically?" And Ethan shook his head again, responding, "No. I didn't need to." And those quiet words sent a ripple of tension through the room because Aria sensed there was something deeper behind them, something she wasn't aware of. Morton sighed, pinched the bridge of his nose, and dismissed them with a warning to avoid further incidents, though Aria caught the fear behind his sternness, almost as if he knew something about Jason that he wasn't sharing. After leaving the office, Aria turned to Ethan and asked softly, "What really happened to him?" Because part of her felt that Ethan knew more than he admitted, but he stopped walking and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, somewhere between honesty and caution, before saying, "Jason does things to people. Hurts them. Bullies them. Breaks them." Today he felt a glimpse of what he puts others through, and though Ethan didn't explain the mechanism, the moral was clear. Karma didn't wait long. Later that day, the school buzzed with chaos as rumors spread. Jason had a panic attack, Jason's heart stopped, Jason cursed the wrong person, Jason got what he deserved. And while Aria didn't celebrate his suffering, she also couldn't shake the feeling that the world had shifted in her favor for once. As she walked to her locker, she found a small group of students waiting, people she hadn't met, people who had watched Jason torment countless victims, and one girl with purple hair stepped forward and said, "I saw what he did. If you ever need anything, anything at all, you come to us." And for the first time Aria felt a warmth spread through her chest. She wasn't alone anymore. After school, Ethan found her outside near the steps and said, "Jason wants to talk to you." And Aria's eyes widened, her instincts screaming that seeing him again was a terrible idea, but something inside her, curiosity, courage, closure, pushed her to go. They walked to the nurse's office where Jason sat on a cot, pale and shaken, his eyes still wide with lingering fear, and when he looked at Aria, the arrogance was gone, replaced by something she never expected from him, remorse. I'm sorry, he whispered, voice trembling. I don't know what happened. I don't know why I felt like I was dying. And he broke off, rubbing his face with trembling hands before forcing out the rest. I shouldn't have touched you. I shouldn't have touched anyone, and Aria stared at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice, but also aware that apologies spoken from fear often fade once the fear disappears. Still, she appreciated it, nodded slightly, and replied quietly, just don't hurt anyone again, and Jason swallowed hard, nodding like a child being given one final chance. After they left, Aria turned to Ethan again and said, you still haven't told me why he looked at you like you were the reason he panicked. And Ethan paused, looking at the horizon as though weighing whether to reveal something heavy, then finally said, because Jason knows my older brother. And my older brother is the reason Jason doesn't bully certain people anymore. Let's just say he taught Jason what real fear feels like, and Aria's eyes widened slightly, pieces clicking into place. Jason's collapse wasn't caused by Ethan, but by Jason's memory of something, or someone far worse. Suddenly the story was bigger than a cafeteria fight, bigger than bullying, bigger than the first week of school. Something deeper was happening, something rooted in past events that connected Ethan and Jason in ways she didn't yet understand, and as they walked off the school grounds, a strange mixture of relief and curiosity filled the air, the beginning of a bond forming between them, quiet, fragile, powerful, one that neither of them expected when the day began. And if you're watching this story unfold, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next chapter will uncover the truth behind Ethan's mysterious past, Jason's fear, and the secret that will shake the entire school. The next morning at Ridgeview High felt strangely electric, like the air itself carried a secret that only a few were aware of, and Aria Hart walked into school with a cautious curiosity swirling inside her chest, the events of yesterday still vivid in her mind, the hit, the panic, the apology that didn't quite mend the damage but hinted at a story deeper than simple cruelty, and now her thoughts kept circling back to Ethan's final words about his brother, the mysterious warning that seemed to explain Jason's sudden collapse more than anything else, and as she reached her locker, she saw Ethan already waiting, leaning casually against the wall with his backpack slung over one shoulder, but there was something different about him today, something heavier in his eyes, as if he'd spent the night debating whether to tell her something enormous. He greeted her with a quiet morning and she returned it with a soft nod, but before she could ask anything, whispers started spreading down the hallway like wildfire as students rushed by in small clusters, talking over one another with breathless urgency. He's back, did you hear? No way, that can't be real, and Aria felt a chill crawl down her spine as she turned to Ethan, who stiffened instantly, his jaw tightening in a way she hadn't seen before, and she asked slowly, who's back? But before he could answer, Principal Morton's voice boomed through the intercom calling all students to the gym for an emergency assembly, something that almost never happened unless the school wanted to deliver news that could shake the entire community. Ethan didn't say a word as they walked together toward the gym, but Aria could feel the tension radiating off him like heat, and by the time they sat down among the crowd of students, her pulse had quickened, sensing that whatever was coming was tied directly to the shadows Ethan kept hidden. The gym lights dimmed and Morton stepped onto the stage, clearing his throat before addressing the hundreds of watching eyes. Students, we have a matter of utmost seriousness to discuss, he began, voice trembling slightly. Yesterday, a physical altercation occurred in the cafeteria that resulted in a student being hospitalized, and the crowd murmured instantly, eyes flicking toward Aria and Ethan. But before Morton could continue, the doors at the back of the gym creaked open and every head turned, the sound echoing like a dramatic cue in a movie, and Aria froze as a tall, broad-shouldered young man stepped inside wearing a dark jacket, a sharp expression, and an aura so intense it seemed to shift the temperature in the room. Ethan stiffened beside her as if someone had punched the air out of his lungs, whispering under his breath a name that made Aria's stomach drop. Logan, and suddenly she understood, Ethan's older brother was here, and from the way the students gasped, from the way Jason, sitting across the gym, went pale as paper and immediately slumped in his seat, she realized that this was the person Jason feared more than any punishment the school could give. Logan Ward walked down the aisle with a confidence that wasn't arrogance but something sharper, something carved out of experience and reputation, and as he approached the front, Morton looked both relieved and terrified, as though he had asked Logan to come but regretted it the moment he arrived. Logan stopped beside Morton and scanned the gym, his eyes landing briefly on Aria, then Jason, then Ethan, and the room felt suffocatingly silent under the weight of his presence. Some of you know me, Logan began, voice low, steady, and carrying a gravitas that made every whisper die instantly. Some of you remember what happened 2 years ago, and Jason flinched visibly, confirming Aria's growing suspicion that the truth behind Jason's fear lived in something that happened long before she arrived. Logan continued, bullying isn't a game. It isn't harmless. It destroys people. And when someone like Jason thinks he can put his hands on someone smaller, quieter, or new, he forgets the consequences that come with cruelty, and Jason shrank even lower, his breathing sharp, his eyes darting toward the exit as if looking for escape. Aria felt her throat tighten as she looked at Ethan's brother. He spoke with the calm certainty of someone who had lived through something dark enough to brand every word with truth, and she suddenly wanted to understand what he meant. What history he shared with Jason, why Jason had collapsed when Ethan stepped in. Logan stepped closer to the stage's edge and said, 2 years ago, Jason hurt someone I cared about badly, and a wave of murmurs swept through the gym, but Logan silenced it with a single hard stare, continuing, I'm not here to threaten anyone. I'm here to tell you that the cycle ends now. Because yesterday, Jason forgot what fear taught him, and now he looked directly at Jason, whose hands were shaking under the chair, and life reminded him, and the room seemed to hold its breath as Jason visibly swallowed, nodding rapidly like a child caught in a lie, and Aria realized in that moment that Jason's panic attack wasn't random, it was triggered by pure psychological fear, by the memory of Logan Ward, a name that clearly carried enough weight to crush Jason's bravado instantly. Morton ended the assembly, but the school didn't resume its normal rhythm. Students moved in hushed circles, glancing at Logan, Ethan, Aria, and Jason as if watching the unfolding of a legend whispered through hallways. After the crowd dispersed, Logan approached Aria and Ethan quietly, and Aria's breath caught in her throat. Up close, Logan looked even more imposing, but his voice softened when he said, "You must be Aria." Ethan told me what happened, and she nodded nervously, replying, "I didn't expect all this," and Logan offered a faint smile, saying, "Bullies thrive until they meet someone who isn't afraid of the truth," and though Aria didn't fully understand, she felt the sincerity in his words. Ethan glanced at his brother with a mix of pride and exasperation, saying, "You didn't have to come here," but Logan shrugged, replying, "Yeah, I did." Someone needed to remind Jason of his place, and then he turned to Aria again, his expression softening just a bit, adding, "Ethan doesn't step into conflicts unless it matters. Protecting you mattered," and Aria felt a warmth bloom inside her chest, a quiet realization forming that Ethan's presence in her life wasn't random, it was intentional, genuine, and protective in a way she hadn't experienced in a long time. Jason, on the other side of the gym, sat hunched over, trembling not from fear of punishment but from the resurfaced memory of whatever Logan had done or stopped from happening 2 years earlier, and Aria wondered how deep the story went, how many scars were hidden behind Jason's cruelty, and as Ethan and Logan walked her toward the parking lot, promising that no one would lay a hand on her ever again, Aria felt something shift inside her, a sense of belonging, strength, and a new beginning she didn't expect when she walked into school just days earlier. And if you're watching this story unfold, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next chapter will reveal what Jason did 2 years ago, why Logan terrifies him, and how Aria's life is about to change forever.